record. Very well. Thank you and welcome to today's presentation on revolutionizing emotional regulation. This is a session particularly relevant for therapists, but also important for counselors, coaches, and everyone who is working in a helping professional relationship and dealing with emotions. My name is Alan Rojas Yacolca. I'm from Peru. I'm a Logosynthesis practitioner and instructor, and I'm the director of the Andes Institute. And well, the world today, we are all witness to how the world today is. Individually, we're all dealing with our human life transitions, basically the things that are emerging in our daily lives because of our age, because of our place in the world, because of our choices, because of XYZ. But also we're dealing with the things that we have perhaps inherited or learned from previous generations, and they also have an impact on us. And also because of the current changes on the global, the global and local contexts, as we have climate change, we have pandemics, we have situations of crisis, situations of war, and every one of these aspects have an impact on us. And if you're working with individuals in your private practice, you will notice that the frequency that we're seeing these issues, depression, anger, grief, anxiety, trauma, phobia, or panic attacks, may have increased. And this poses a particular challenges for our well-being and how we approach these issues in therapy or in any other helping profession. Now, this raises a question as to how we may better support the increase of emotional well-being in the people we work with, and what approaches we use to support our people. Now, when it comes to precisely supporting people, there are new challenges emerging. Conventional or traditional therapy sometimes is falling short, or it has certain limitations. For example, sometimes it becomes increasingly harder to identify hidden emotional triggers. I recall this, one of my patients, let's call her Marie, and she would come to sessions sobbing. She would talk about 4 issues at the same time, and she would say, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what is causing this. And if I had used the previous models I was trained in, I would have probably spent quite a lot of time with her with open questions, trying to hold space for her to try to elaborate on what her current life situation was, what was happening. But I may have struggled to find what was the root cause of the issue. I do recall another client, let's call her Sophia. And when I worked with her some 10 years ago before Logosynthesis, I recall that with her, I spent much time working on psych medication. We talked about what anxiety was and what maybe the causes of it, how it was connected to our thoughts, and how our thinking would sometimes lead us to create these anticipatory scenarios or catastrophic scenarios, and how it was important for her to question such thoughts and to come back to reality and ground herself and many things. And yet I recall this one time she would say, we've been working so many sessions on this fear, but I still fear going out into the city. She was agoraphobic, right? At some point, sometimes traditional methods fall short. We end up just managing symptoms instead of just resolving the deeper issues that cause such distress. For some others, it's all about, addressing emotional overwhelm safely. There was this one time, this is a very heart-wrenching case. This client was struggling. It's the same client as just now, Sophia. She was agoraphobic. She was trying to go out into the city. She was having bouts of anxiety and panic. She would live alone with her animals. And at some point in session, we are exploring. And she says, I don't know what's going on. I feel scared. I have this weight on my chest. And I feel like I cry for help and no one comes, but I know that mother is near. And from what we have talked before, I had an idea what was going on. But that raises the question, should I just confront her with what I thought was going on? Should I ask more questions and go in deeper? And what if this risk is for her to face something she's not ready for? Or what if there's re-traumatization? With previous methods, if I had used another method I was trained in, there was a high risk of re-traumatization because it involved inviting her to enter into the scene, to face or confront the people that were present there, to relive the experience and relieve the same emotional pain. And what I have found is different when working with logosynthesis is that you don't have to do any of that. As long as the client is aware of the emotional reactions they're having, and as long as the client is able to either figure out an image that represents a situation or perhaps a metaphor that represents a struggle, they're able to process the situation without having to face the difficult pain and relive the story. After processing, she gave me a metaphor. She said, I feel like there's a big anvil on my chest. And when she processed that, she started crying. Then she calmed down and she said, now I know what the weight was on my chest. It was my mother's former partner, and he was abusing me sexually. Before, she wasn't able to phrase that or even become aware of that. But after processing, using this method, working with a metaphor, she was able to neutralize the emotional charge that was tied to this memory. And after processing that, she was able to talk about it without feeling overwhelmed by it, which is very important when we work with clients when they're going through trauma cases. We need to offer them a safe space to process with them while protecting them from re-traumatization, by relieving the experience. And the same applies for other clients. There was this other client I was working with. His name is Rodrigo. And this was also a client who had suffered sexual abuse. And because of the trauma experience, he was not able to basically perceive all the puzzle pieces. He was usually very dissociated. He was at times speaking in very general terms. And there was this one time where he would say, it's an emptiness on my chest and I want to cry and I cannot snap out of it. And I don't know what causes it. Sometimes you cannot find the trigger. And in his case, I held space for him. We continued talking for a while. There was no memory attached to this experience. There was no fantasy coming up for him. But he said, there is this blue light bulb. It's like a flash that I see in front of me. So we took that metaphor and we processed that. And then he said, after processing that, he said, I hear a note. It's like a one note of a song. And so we processed that. It was a different kind of a stimulus. And after we processed that, he said, now I remember the song. Let me find it out. He went online, found the song, played it, and he started listening to it. And then he's just completely sobbing for a couple of minutes. I just held space for him. But then he said, now I know why I'm so sad. I have this dream I've been dreaming for years. And it's a dream of a fantasy that never happened. He said, when I was a teenager, I used to dream about this family I would long for, I would yearn for. And I had this huge story about how I had met this beautiful girl. We fell in love together. We got married. We had a kid. And then there was this accident and I lost them. I lost the family that I always wanted to have. And so we now had a concrete fantasy. We processed that fantasy together with logosynthesis. And after that, he said, now I know what I lost and why I'm so sad. I lost my family. And this opened up a completely different chapter in his story. He started talking about how his parents had split up when he was very little. His mother had become very depressed as a result. And he was usually alone under the care of his 12-year-old sister while he was 6 years old. He said there were some days I wouldn't eat and I felt so lost and so confused. But the point here of the story is that sometimes addressing undefined emotional patterns can be quite complex with conventional therapy models. But logosynthesis allows to address them in very skillful ways, sometimes working with metaphors, representations, drawings, and sculptures There's so much more that we can do with art, for example, with logosynthesis, to go deeper without risking that the person ends up re-traumatized. And as we were talking about this, he came up with something else. He said, during those times I was alone under the care of my sister. And then he talked about how his sister would have started consuming drugs, and she was a drug addict. And as a teenager now himself, he was already 13 and she was 19, she would attempt against herself. He said she's holding a knife and he started sobbing. He was remembering a traumatic scene. And then all of a sudden he opened his eyes and he just dissociates. He gets spaced out and just disconnects and start asking him what's going on now. And he says it's too painful. I don't want to go back there. If I had used previous methods, I would have necessarily invited him to go back into that scene to process it somehow, or maybe to confront it or to redecide and do something different. But in this situation, I said, pick up a piece of paper and just make a representation on a piece of paper of what's going on. And he drew a knife, and we processed that representation of the knife, and that took care of that scene. The level of distress went down from a 9 down to a 3, and he was able to say, during weeks and months, this was a story in my house. This is what I had to deal with. I had to become the adult because my mother was not a functioning adult. I had to take care of my sister. I was the youngest one. And this is why now as an adult, and he started making sense of his whole story all by himself. Now I know why I have to be the strong one, why I have to take care of others, because I'm constantly scared that something terrible will happen if I don't step in. And that was a core belief that he had to work through. And so sometimes we get to work with very extreme cases, very deep cases. Sometimes we don't. But all that they have in common is that when we use logosynthesis can help us to resolve hidden emotional triggers without needing full articulation or full verbal articulation. We can dissolve the root causes of distress beyond symptom management. And sometimes we can, or many times we can heal overwhelming emotions safely without re-traumatization. And these are some core strengths of logosynthesis, which are extremely useful in my private practice today. But that's a lot of talk for now. So why don't instead we do a little experiment for something really simple. It doesn't have to be a very painful story. I will invite you to think about a situation currently in your life that stresses you a little bit. We think about something that stresses you from 0 to 10, where 0 means no distress and 10 means I cannot feel any worse. I invite you to think about something that stresses you maximum up to a 5. So it's something mild, something we can work with, and there is no risk for you opening up something so painful, but something that you can experiment with. Would you be willing to experiment with this? Please nod your heads if you would like to. Okay, so I have your permission. Okay, so here are some rules. If at any point you would like to stop the exercise, all you need to do is open your eyes, and that's okay. After the exercise, we can talk about and see what happens. So I invite you to think about a recent situation where you felt stressed in life, or something unpleasant happened and you did not enjoy it, and it led you to feel uncomfortable, perhaps very angry or sad or scared. And just remember that situation for a moment. Just notice where it is happening, where you are there, who is there with you, and what's happening. And while you're noticing these details, close your eyes and start looking within. And notice where in your body do you feel uncomfortable? Where do you feel the distress? It may be your chest or your throat or your stomach. Somewhere in your body there's some distress where it feels uncomfortable. Just notice that. And as you notice that place, observe what physical sensation you feel there. Is it a contraction? Is it a push? Is it rigidity? Does it burn? Is it itchy, etc.? And as you feel that physical sensation, notice what emotion you feel. It may be sadness, anger, fear, or another one, and give it a name. So now you have this feeling in this part of your body, and you're feeling that emotion. What thoughts go through your mind? What do you tell yourself about this situation? This is, and what do you tell yourself about yourself? I am. So you experience these physical sensations, this emotion or emotions, these thoughts. And what is your level of distress from 0 to 10, where 0 means no distress and 10 means I cannot feel any worse? And just notice that. And while this is happening, observe the space around you and notice what comes up. Maybe an image, maybe a sound. It's a situation that led you to feel this way. So we're now going to make an experiment. I will say some sentences, and you will repeat each sentence after me. And after the sentence, all you have to do is pause and observe. The sentences will do the work. Please repeat after me. I retrieve all my energy bound up in this situation, and I take it to the right place in my cell. And you let it sink in. I remove all non-me energy related to this situation and everything it represents. And I remove it from all my cells, all of my body, and my personal space. And I send it to where it truly belongs. Just let it sink in. I retrieve all my energy, bound up in all my reactions to this situation and everything it represents. And I take it to the right place in myself. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. If you have some water, you may drink some water. It's always good to drink water when we're working with logosynthesis. And now start noticing what shifted, what happened. Initially, there were a or more physical sensations in your body. What happened with that? And what happened with what you were feeling, with emotion? Is it the same? Has it changed? And what about your level of distress? I invite you to enter into the chat box and share what was your level of distress in the beginning from 0 to 10 and what it is now. Okay. So initially it was up to a 4, then 0, good. 7 to a 2, 5 to 1. So there are some changes to how you react. If you think back to the initial situation that triggered you some distress, how do you react now when you think back to it? 7 to 5. Es ist weg und ich fühle mich leicht. You feel better, you feel light. Good. 7 to 3. Okay. So when you start reading this, if your level of distress was high, it goes down to a 3 or less. Usually the issue is processed. But when it's about 3 or above, there's usually something left to process and to work with. No more sadness. That's good. Okay. And now when you think back at the initial issue, how do you react now? So the distress decreased, there is no more sadness. What other change do you notice? So sense is 0. You're more relaxed. Thank you, Mary. Okay. So allows me to look at the situation with more clarity. Thank you, Joe. Okay. So usually when people have this experience, what they report is they feel lighter, they feel more clear, they're able to think more clearly about the situation. If you're working with a client in session, this means that they're able to go back to the initial situation and perhaps think clearly about it instead of us having to drill them down with questions or confront their thoughts. Usually the limiting beliefs vanish or they disappear, or they're able to think back about it and then realize whether they were limiting them or not and what they want to think from now on. We don't have to hint them what to think. They're able to think by themselves. Their levels of confidence rise. They feel more calm. There's more connection. There's more compassion. There's more courage. Fear becomes into courage, and people are no longer limited by obstacles. And people find new creative ways to deal with the same situation all by themselves without us having to tell them what to do or having to offer them alternatives. They're able to think them by themselves. So on that note, let's go back for a moment to the presentation. This was a little demonstration. I was initially thinking about this typical core therapeutical challenges that we face. If you'd like to read more about it, there's a free available guide on this website, on my website. It's andis.institute. If you go there, you can just simply sign up and you will be able to download it. It's a 13-page document offering you examples of the applications of logosynthesis in different cases related to emotional regulation, whether it's about dealing with phobias or grief or depression or sadness or anxiety. You will find there many typical examples of how we use logosynthesis in these cases, whether we're working with fantasies or beliefs or memories. So if you're interested, you'll be able to find understanding of these issues, insights on how logosynthesis can complement your current methods to resolve these issues, and of course, real-world case studies. Many people, when they come to logosynthesis, they are curious about where they can continue exploring and learning more about logosynthesis. Two options you may have that I'd like to talk to you about are the self-coaching with logosynthesis program and the logosynthesis basic seminar. In the first one, this is more applicable to for those who are looking for personal development, for those who are looking to find ways to regulate their own emotions or increase their courage, or find ways to deal with daily stress, or find ways to remove obstacles from their daily life, or whether it's creativity or performance or confidence. And for those of you who are more curious about exploring logosynthesis and using it on your private practice, the first step onto becoming a practitioner is the Logosynthesis Basic Seminar. It's an 18-hour program. It includes group work opportunities for group practice. You get access to supervision. There are live demonstrations in the application of logosynthesis to a variety of issues. And you get to also ask questions. Sometimes after practice, many of the theory questions can be solved in session. And every session lasts 3 hours. So you get to have enough time for whether it's theory, practice, supervision, to answer your questions, maybe get some mentoring, and test what you're learning so that you can bring this back to your private practice and learn more and apply it and see how it works. This usually brings up more questions and we can take them during the session. So if you're interested, you can find also these options at the Andes Institute. And now I'd like to open the room for questions. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to discuss your experience, more than happy to talk with you and see what happens. So do you have any questions or comments about your experience, or if you have any questions about Logosynthesis, well, this is the right time. Just open your mic and jump ahead. I see some familiar faces. Some of you already know Logosynthesis. And so I have a question for you. Since you have joined the Logosynthesis Day, what are your questions about Logosynthesis, or what motivated you to join us? Maybe you can share that in the chat. We can talk about it as well.
I got a question.
Sasha.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your input. I got a question. Sometimes I'm thinking about a problem, and I got a feeling that I have to dive deeper to solve it. The problem on the surface, it's on a surface, but the root cause issue is deeper. But I'm asking, are there techniques to get to get a deep dive into the real problem, or to get the real problem? Yeah.
Right. So the first rule of thumb when working with Logosynthesis is to stay with your process. So that means that you work with what emerges. Now, if you're more experienced when working with this, if you're working with clients, depending on the scope of your practice, whether you're a therapist or a counselor or a coach, you can work with fantasy. So depending on what the problem is, you can invite the person to, or I'd better ask, would you like to define a little bit what the issue is that you're working with? Or would you like me to take the question in general terms? General terms. Okay. So
I have no specific examples, so it's a main question.
Okay. So I have two options for that. Either one is I stay with the process and I work with what emerges and just go step by step. It's kind of like working with a salami or peeling an onion. I just go layer by layer. So usually when we deal with the first trigger, the next one will arise, and we can progress by taking trigger by trigger, eliminating one by one. And this usually takes us deeper. In some cases, for example, when I was working with a client who was very scared and was dealing with fear, we would usually start eliminating triggers of fear. So the fantasies of things she was anticipating from the future. But eventually this was not enough. So what was behind it was a belief that the world is dangerous. She believed the world was dangerous, and so she would start imagining multiple situations where terrible things would happen to her. So every session was about catastrophe, right? But when we realized that what was behind it was the belief that the world is dangerous, then we could deal with that belief and we could neutralize that belief. If that didn't work, then the question will become, where did she conclude that the world was dangerous? And this would take us back into the past. We would see, where did we learn the world was dangerous? Something happened that led to that conclusion. Or is it somebody told you that the world was dangerous, or something happened that you concluded the world was dangerous? And that's another room to explore, but it really depends on the scope of your practice. If it's a coaching practice, we usually work with fantasies and beliefs. In therapy, we go a little bit deeper.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Has.
Some clients, when I ask them to find where is this, energy in their body, okay, So they're not able to find, okay, sometimes they're not able to find where it is. So how can we solve that kind of problem?
When you say to find the energy, what issue are you working with?
Any issue, for example, I know we ask them to locate where do they feel in their space, right? If they're feeling, say, for example, very low self-esteem, okay, if they're feeling useless, okay, no self respect or self-worth. So we will ask them to see where is this in their space, right? Whose energy it belongs to. So
Okay, so if I think I am useless, that's a belief. I would probably tell my client, if you're thinking you're useless, where in your body are you experiencing that? Oh, I feel it in my throat. It's like a big lump there. So that's a
mm,
physical sensation. And when you're experiencing that lump in your throat, what emotion do you feel? Oh, I feel really sad. So there's a lump in your throat, you're feeling sad, you're thinking you're useless. Close your eyes, stay with that, and observe what happens in the space around you. And there's usually a scene that comes up that is related to these reactions. And then when a scene comes up, you usually work with the scene and apply logosynthesis to that scene. That can help.
okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Some cases they're not able to find where no where it is in their body. See, um, so they are confused. That's the issue. In such cases, what can we do?
Then I would take a step back and take a look into the relationship. It may be too soon for the person to start exploring, and it may
Mhm,
be an invitation to first develop more the working alliance so that the person may feel more safe before
mhm.
exploring. It may be too soon for them.
Okay. And one more question is,
Mhm.
what is the best time to start the sentences? Sometimes we may want to, sometimes we may want to ask more questions to understand the issue, better. We are tempted to ask more questions, for example. Should we wait until all our questions are answered, or should we jump into these statements because amygdala, when the amygdala is active, then we're supposed to do the sentence. What's the best time?
Usually, when we're exploring with a client and we have narrowed it down to a specific issue, by the time
Mhm,
we have explored all the reactions, physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts, something comes up as a trigger. If you have found a trigger, then you can use the sentences and proceed to processing. But before that, you need to have found the trigger, and before that, the reactions. If the client is not activated, then process and trigger would not work. There needs to be some enough emotional activation in the client for them to work on processing, because this is not a cognitive intervention. It's not just rational. The client has to experience it before going into processing. So that should usually tell you when to intervene. As a rule of thumb, in a session, I at least spend 20 minutes exploring with a client before I ever introduce the sentences. So, and even some sessions I don't even introduce the sentences because it's about developing the relationship and first
mhm.
getting to find out what the trigger is. With some clients, it takes a whole session to find the trigger or more sessions to find the trigger. It depends on where they are in their journey.
Yeah, that's the problem. Sometimes you don't know when the trigger is coming. When they're becoming emotional. Sometimes they may not become emotional so much. So yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah. You can also take a look at the level of distress, right?
Mhm.
So that
Okay.
usually tells you how activated the client is.
Okay, I think that helps. So we
Mhm.
should ask how much is the currently the distress level so we can then jump into statements, right?
Yeah, yeah. The client has already found the trigger and they don't need to know what the trigger is. I tell the
Mm.
client just sit with your reactions, experience your physical sensations, your emotions and thought. Just close your eyes and observe what happens around you. And something will emerge. They don't need to know it, they just need to observe and something comes up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other question or comment?
Hi, so you had said this is the breakout room for emotional regulation with logosynthesis.
Correct.
And so I was curious if you had any tips or ideas for working with kids in the moment if they're having a hard time.
Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues, Miriam Nordeman, is extremely good with working with kids on logosynthesis. She even wrote a little book about this for children. And one of the things that I learned from her is that when kids draw how they're feeling, they're able to come up with a very creative representation of what is happening with them. And when you apply logosynthesis to that representation, to that drawing, or maybe sculpture with Play-Doh, it really takes care of the issue.
Okay.
So as abstract as it may look and whatever it may represent for the child, even if we don't know what it is, but they do know what it is. And we just apply to it and it works. And we take it from there and see what happens.
Great. And so you say the logosynthesis in relation to the art of Play-Doh or the drawing itself.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, Aurora Maria is asking who wrote the book. That would be Miriam Nordeman. I'll write the book in the chat, the author in the chat box. Nordeman.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The book is in French and Italian, I believe, and she also took a version in English. You're welcome, Aurora.
Alan, is it all right if I say a little bit more about working with children?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Hops. I've worked with children for many years and a psychologist. And I would say that you need to know about safety for dysregulation for anyone, including children. So obviously, you're not going to use objects if you are afraid that the child is going to be dangerous, like Play-Doh or whatever. But if they are calmer, then yes. But if it's in the moment, I would say that if someone is extremely dysregulated and they're becoming violent to themselves or others or objects, you need to create safety just like you would in any other situation. So if they are calm enough to be able to take on logosynthesis, then that's fine. If not, you might want to work on behalf of them, which is a more advanced skill. If you're not familiar with logosynthesis, that can be described with trainings, or using a surrogate, for example, a teacher or a parent, as an intermediary to help. Because if a child is so dysregulated, then they're not going to be able to be available to use some of these more present prefrontal cortex kind of ways of working. Right. Yeah, I see Joe, who works with kids, shaking his head yes. So thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's important to recognize also developmentally where kids are. So my experience in using anything like logosynthesis with them, sometimes I've actually had to modify the sentences a bit. Because even if I can't get a kid to kind of just accept the sentences and just do it, which some will do, they'll just trust you if you've got that kind of relationship. But in other cases, I might have kids who are questioning, or criticizing even what the sentences are. So you have to be creative. And so, kids are very open when they're open, but it takes a while for them to trust you enough to be open.
Thank you, Joe.
Can you share? Yeah. Thank you guys so much for expanding on that. Can you share maybe some of the creative ways that you would say the sentences? And specifically I'm also a parent just, wanting to work with my son who, was overwhelmed today at his first basketball game, for instance, or something like that. And I don't know that he's going to be maybe the one saying the sentences, but just looking for a logosynthesis perspective on that kind of a situation. So I understand what Lori was saying about working on behalf of them, and just curious if Joe had any examples of his ways to make the sentences maybe a little more interesting to children or creative, like he said.
Yeah, so what I would say about that is that this is a case too of knowing the kid. and what they respond to. So you have to actually get creative yourself with how you're going to create a new sentence, but the essence of what you've got in logosynthesis. Um, and but I want to address something else that you just said, because it has to do with what Lori was saying too, and acting on behalf of the child. And that is an issue around the aspect of the contagion of the parent and their emotions, on how that impacts the child. So you have to take care of yourself first. So one of the things that I suggest to parents is you use the sentences on yourself first before you can even begin to act on behalf of your child, because you have to get yourself into the right space and into the right energy, if you will, to then be able to figure out what's going to work best for your kid.
Yeah, that is very important. That's a great point. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you guys for joining this session today. I'm afraid our time has come to an end. We're coming back into the main room now in 10 seconds. And if you have more questions, please bring it back into the main room and we'll continue talking. Thank you.